Welcome into another exciting episode of the Easter Pod. I'm your host, Corey Easterday, and I am very glad to have you joining me on the show today because we have Garret Price. Garret is a writer, podcaster, and fantasy football analyst with Dynasty Nerds, and Garret wears a lot of different hats, has a lot of really cool stuff that he's involved in, but his role with Dynasty Nerds is the one that he is perhaps the best known for. So Garret and I had a really awesome conversation that you're definitely not going to want to miss. Before I get into my conversation with Garret, I just want to thank you so much for listening to the Easter Pod and remind you that if you'd like to engage with the show, you can find us on social media. We are at the Easter Pod on Twitter and Instagram. We are the Easter Pod on Facebook. And if you are listening right now, you likely found us on a major podcast platform, so you can listen to the Easter Pod wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, definitely be sure to leave us a rating and a review, and be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button. If you're new to the show, we have 3 episodes out already. We have the first one just briefly explaining what the Easter Pod is and what it's all about, why it exists. In the episode after that, I had a really great conversation with my wife, Megan, about the business we own together, Easterday Creative, and her journey as a creative and photographer. And last week's episode, I had a chat with Bob Book from the Film and Whiskey podcast about all things movie and whiskey related, and that was a really fun conversation. So if you haven't gotten a chance to check out either of our first 3 episodes, definitely be sure to do that. Garret and I had a really awesome conversation on today's show because we were lucky enough to have Garret as a guest the week after his experience as a first-time media member working for Dynasty Nerds at the NFL Combine. We also talked some fantasy football, specifically this year's NFL rookie draft class, and we discussed Garret's personal journey to becoming a pretty big deal as an analyst in the fantasy world working for Dynasty Nerds. One of the other things Garret and I talk about in our conversation today leads perfectly into this week's Easter egg, which, if you're new to the show, an Easter egg is just a pun on my last name. I love dad jokes, and I love using obvious puns and wordplay, especially regarding my last name of Easterday. And an Easter egg also just expands on a fact about the episode or the podcast itself. And for today's Easter egg, I just briefly wanted to chat more about the larger theme of community, especially as it relates to fantasy football and the Brotherhood Dynasty League that Garret and I are both involved with that we talk about. And in doing today's episode with Garret, I was reminded of a story from years ago when he and I were involved with intramural basketball at the university we attended. Shout out Malone University. Garret and I were on a intramural basketball team together, and there was one particular game I remember where I don't remember the reason why, but I remember as a young 20-year-old, however old I was, that I was not great sometimes at handling my emotions during basketball games because even though, to be honest, the intramural league we were involved in had A teams and B teams, and I'll give you a guess as to which teams I was always on because while having a deep love of basketball, was not super great at playing basketball, so I was always on the B League squad. So I was ultra competitive, even though I wasn't the best basketball player in the world. And there was a game where I got really heated, and Garret, my teammate and friend, pulled me aside, took me off the court. I think we went out into a hallway, and he started to calm me down, and he just began encouraging me to be the man he knew I was capable of being, to be better than I was acting, to be just basically be better than that. You are better than that. I know you're capable of so much more. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget him pulling me aside or taking the time to encourage me, because that day I was reminded in particular that I'm not alone just in general, and I have people who are willing to love me and fight for my highest good, even when I don't deserve it. And that was a moment where Garret was specifically an example of that, but our Brotherhood Dynasty League in many ways has been that, because among many other people and many other relationships I've had, something like the Brotherhood Dynasty League and other fantasy football leagues I've been honored to be a part of with other friends have meant so much more to me than just playing the game of fantasy football, which I enjoy. It's meant a chance to develop deeper connections and relationships with people that I love and bond over something together. And this whole idea of community as it relates to fantasy football reminds me of a column that ESPN's senior fantasy football analyst, Matthew Berry, who Garrett and I chat a little bit about in this episode. He had a column, his famous love-hate column. There was one specifically in 2018 where he talked about a guy named Scott. And Scott was not the guy's real name, but Scott was someone that had been struggling with sobriety and alcohol addiction. And in the article, Matthew Berry talks about how Scott's niece invited him into a fantasy football league with their family as he was chasing sobriety, and how Scott loved it and ended up creating a fantasy football league with his Alcoholics Anonymous group for all of them to help each other stay sober and stay accountable, which is just incredible when you think about it, that something like a silly game of fantasy football could play such a big time role in something so serious and that has real life consequences like battling an alcohol addiction. And I think to me, the overall point is, aside from entertainment, aside from having fun, aside from being a game, that things like fantasy football, things like pop culture, music, or sports, one of the biggest reasons I get into all this stuff personally is for the opportunities it affords me to connect with other people, to share something you love with someone, to develop a common bond, to have community. I've heard it said before, and I can't remember the direct quote, but that especially in the case of Scott from that article, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think his story is a perfect example of that when you're connected to other people and you're developing shared bonds, that it can be incredibly healing. It can boost our self-esteem. It can give us so much confidence. And I'm not trying to be prescriptive for anyone out there that's battling addiction. It's so much more nuanced and complicated than that. But I really do believe that finding a common bond, finding things that we share together, remembering that we're not alone, connecting with other people can help us accomplish really great and important things in our lives. One last thing I want to shout out as it relates to the larger themes of fantasy football being so much more than just a game is an organization called Champion Causes. Champion Causes was started by Michael Gelkin, who is a Cowboys reporter for the Dallas Morning News, and it's been going on for a while now, and I've participated the last few years, and I think it's an incredible idea. It's basically at the end of each fantasy season, especially for leagues that have money on the line or, where people are winning money through their fantasy league, the idea is taking a portion of your fantasy football winnings and donating it to an organization, a nonprofit that's doing incredible things in the community, that maybe a player or one of your favorite players, specifically the idea is that a player that helped you to win your fantasy league, you donate it to the organization that they support, a portion of your earnings. And I've always really enjoyed that concept because, yet again, it's just another way that something like fantasy football can have important real-world implications and can be used for good. Now, speaking of community and important causes, the very last thing I wanted to mention before we get into my conversation with Garrett, as you may or may not be aware, I'm involved with an organization, a nonprofit called Current Initiatives. Right now, I have the pleasure of serving as the national director for Current Initiatives, and Current is a national organization started in Tampa, Florida. I ended up being the founder of Current's branch in Ohio that is still going strong to this day, thanks to our incredible team. And Current, one of our biggest goals is to meet a tangible need for families and to do it in a way that is really empowering and dignifying. And the main vehicle we have to do that right now, we have several initiatives, but the main thing we do is called the Laundry Project. And the Laundry Project is basically a community event that we have local businesses and churches and individuals that will sponsor, volunteer, bring quarters, laundry supplies, all sorts of stuff. And for a few hours on, let's say, a Saturday, we'll turn the laundromat into a community center of hope. We will provide free laundry services, pay for people's laundry that come. And in addition to meeting that tangible need of clean laundry, which is so important, it's just yet another way to take something so mundane, such as laundry, that maybe we take it for granted or don't think about having to do it, that can be such a big deal for families, especially families that are struggling to make ends meet. And we use it as a vehicle to not only meet that tangible need, but to connect together in community. Like we talked about fantasy football and the examples we brought up just remind each other that we're not alone, that we have each other's backs. And one of the things I love about Current is because we're a national organization, we have the opportunity to respond when things are happening in real time. And as you've heard, Nashville, Tennessee, which is a city where I have many friends that live there, as a lot of us do, have friends and family there. Nashville was very unfortunately devastated by some tornadoes within a week of this taping. And so one of the things we want to do as Current is we have a really awesome team in Nashville that has been doing laundry projects now for the last several months. And they want, which I think is an incredible idea, to host a emergency laundry project to help out with some of the tornado relief efforts in Nashville. So I want to shout out that emergency laundry project that's happening in Nashville through Current. And if you want to get involved with that, if you'd like to donate to that in Nashville, that emergency laundry project, or if you want to just donate to Current and what we're doing in general, like I said, we have locations where we do the laundry project all over the country. There's a good chance that there's one near you. You can check out our website, laundrybycurrent.org, for the laundry project. Engagecurrent.org is our main website, but if you want to learn about the laundry project specifically, go to laundrybycurrent.org, and I will put this in the show notes where you can go to donate. But we'd love to get you involved with helping out with that relief effort for the tornadoes in Nashville, and would just love to get you involved in general if that's something you'd be interested in. So again, thank you for listening to this episode. And just remember, if you want to follow Garret on Twitter, he is at Dynasty Price. He has a lot of incredible content. And you can also find his work at Dynasty Nerds. And another show that he's involved with, the Dynasty Rewind podcast, can be found at Dynasty Rewind. And give Dynasty Nerds, give Dynasty Rewind, give Garret at Dynasty Price some love on social media. If you check out the Dynasty Nerds podcast or the Dynasty Rewind podcast, be sure to give them a rating, leave them a review also, and subscribe to the awesome work they're doing. So without further ado, my conversation with Garret Price. Well, I am very excited and honored to have joining me on the Easter Pod today, a very dear and close friend, Garret Price. Garret, how are you doing today?
Dude, I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm great. I really can't thank you enough for being willing to come on and chat. For those of you that don't know Garret, first of all, you're missing out. He's a great guy. And in addition to being the director of sports ministry at the Martin Center, is also perhaps more well-known as at Dynasty Price on Twitter, the co-host of the Dynasty Nerds podcast, and also a writer and fantasy football analyst for Dynasty Nerds. And quick bump for Garret on Twitter. He's almost to 10,000 followers. So if you like what you hear out of Garret today, make sure you give him a follow on Twitter and get him over that 10K hump. But Garret is also a co-host of the Dynasty Rewind podcast. And he's also, by all accounts, an incredible husband and father, which is perhaps the most important of all. But in my mind, maybe the most important title of all that Garret has is he is a member alongside myself of the Brotherhood Dynasty League, which we're going to get into on today's show a little bit more. And Garret also, for those of you who don't know, he has been someone else who's been a big help in getting the Easter Pod started. So Garret wears a lot of hats, has a lot of titles, does a lot of cool stuff, and I'm really pumped to have him on. You know, you guys get into a lot of really great, it's called Dynasty Nerds for a reason. You go really in depth with a lot of stuff related to dynasty leagues and fantasy football. But for those of us on the Easter Pod, I want to consider our conversation today a little bit of a 101, not the 101 in this year's draft, but more of a 101 on the basics of Dynasty, what it is. And we're going to talk about players and all that stuff as well. But for those who aren't familiar What is a dynasty league exactly, and how does it work?
Yeah, so the major difference between a dynasty league and a traditional redraft fantasy football league is in your normal leagues, each year, year in, year out, you draft a brand new fantasy football team. It's exciting, it's shiny, it's new. And then typically for well over half of your league, about 5 weeks in, you realize your team is hot garbage and you no longer have fun playing, and you kind of ignore your fantasy football league until the fantasy football league starts up the following August. The difference for Dynasty is whether your team is amazing or terrible, you keep that team year in and year out. So you don't draft a brand new team every year. The exciting part is, though, even if, let's say, at the startup, you do a terrible job of drafting, your team's not very good, you have motivation to continue working with your team as opposed to just giving up on the season, because now you're starting to play for next year. So you might trade established veteran players, stars in the league, for younger players that might last on your team longer, and rookie picks. That way you can add talent to your team through the draft, very similar to how NFL teams would add talent to their fantasy or to their real football teams. So it's a much deeper way to play fantasy football, and I think it much more closely mirrors what it would be like to be a GM in the NFL.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of Dynasty, and you spoke a lot to what I love about Dynasty leagues and what I love about being in one, and why I wish I was in more, quite honestly, is because it really is like you're running kind of a real NFL franchise. You are the GM. It really closely mirrors that. You talked a little bit about why Dynasty is exciting to you, and I know that's one of the reasons I love it is how it mirrors like running a real football team. But why do you love Dynasty in particular? Why is that something you've decided to focus on in terms of fantasy football?
Yeah, I think the concept of being a GM has been one of the big motivating factors. You know, you look at these guys and the opportunity that they have to evaluate talent and then try to turn that talent into success on the field. You're doing a lot of the same thing, and so for me, I've always enjoyed the concept of building things up from the ground up. I was even, kind of a weird kid, to be honest. Like, I always loved sports. I always loved playing sports, but even like to a deeper level, like I would be 6, 7 years old and I would be in my room and I would like line up all of my football cards based on, different teams that I created in my mind. And so, one team would have, Barry Sanders at running back, and they would have Torrey Holt at wide receiver, and so it didn't even always make sense because they weren't always necessarily playing in the same time period, but it didn't matter to me, and so then the other team would have Emmitt Smith and Jerry Rice, and then one team was real special because they got to have Steve Young as their quarterback, and so I would put all these teams and I would literally write down the stats from like these made up games that I would play by myself as a kid in my room. And then when I got a little bit older, I got really into the NCAA football games, but I didn't even worry about playing the actual game. I was always worried about the recruiting process of like trying to recruit all of these players and try to get them on my team. So I just love the idea and the concept of being able to like build teams and build these things from the ground up. And so this was kind of the most natural outlet to try to do that in real life. So I think that's what really made me fall in love with it.
It's so funny you mentioned all that stuff you used to do as a kid, because we've never actually talked about this. I would do similar things with my dad. I would make these really big lists of, let's say, 60 NBA players or NFL players, and I would just sit there with him and I would ask him to read off random numbers, and I would eliminate guys one by one, almost like a tournament, until I had whoever I was crowning like the best player in the NFL or the NBA, like just weird little things, like kind of building rosters like that as a kid. I think we're similarly minded on that. And that's a big reason I enjoy Dynasty too, is just that ownership year round of building something. So I totally agree. How did you get started with Dynasty Nerds, and what's it been like to be a part of it?
So we talked about a little bit earlier, my time in the Brotherhood Dynasty League, and even though it's been really cool how I've gotten into a ton more leagues and a ton more opportunities, like the Brotherhood Dynasty League is and will always be like my first priority as far as like dynasty fantasy football goes. But even a few years back, I was taking the time to like write up. I did it for a couple of years where I would write up all of these predictions each week for how teams would do, and the matchup one team would have against the other, and I just did it for fun, just to add some talking points and competitive nature to the league. And I remember a couple guys in the league literally said to me one time, they're like, Garrett, you when you do these, you're actually not like half bad at writing these up. Like, you should consider like doing it for people that care. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And obviously like they were joking. But it really did get my wheels spinning of like, I have always kind of thought that, being in the media to some extent, doing, radio or, obviously like an ESPN anchor or, some of that kind of stuff would be really cool. But even just the simple concept of being able to write down my thoughts on, current happenings in the NFL and stuff like that was something I always enjoyed. So I was like, I might do it. We'll see here and there. And I remember talking with my dad even more, like, and he was like, Garrett, you really should look into doing some of this. He's like, this is the kind of stuff you've always enjoyed doing. You've always loved doing and being a part of it. And so, you should try to get in. So Dynasty Nerds was a podcast that I had listened to. It was one of my favorite podcasts. I digested it every week, took a lot of mental notes on some of the evaluations that they had. And one day they were like, there's some opportunity that we have to ask some writers. If anybody's interested in potentially writing for us, feel free to write a sample article and reach out. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a professional writer by any means, but I'll throw something out there and just see what happens. And they liked the article, started writing for them. This would have been back in right around the turn of the year between 2018 and 2019. So that December, January time there. I wrote an article. They liked it. I started writing on a regular basis. And then it kind of just started to grow from there. A few months later, I had an opportunity to do a guest spot on their podcast because they're actually in Cleveland, Ohio, technically Mentor, but not far from Cleveland. And so they were like, would you want to come up sometime and do a guest spot? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. So I drove all the way up there, and they were like, hey, you didn't totally suck. So would you consider doing it, on a more regular basis? And things have just kind of grown out of that. So it's been a really, really cool opportunity.
Yeah. And I remember calling you up when you first posted in our Brotherhood Dynasty League group text, the infamous group text, that you had had your first article for Dynasty Nerds published, and just kind of geeking out over, because we've been in this league for 7 years together and we've known each other since college. So to kind of see a close friend be able to pursue their dream and make it, have an opportunity like that was just so cool. And it was so fun to celebrate that together when it first happened. And, just as a personal note, it's been incredible and I don't say this flippantly, it's been one of the great joys for me as a friend over the last year and a half or so that you've been working with Dynasty Nerds, to see you build such a platform through them and see you gain such a following. And I've told you this personally, I can think of no better person than yourself to have earned what you've earned, and you work hard, and you're really smart, and you're really good at this stuff. So I could spend the rest of the podcast just building you up and encouraging you, but it's just been so fun to kind of sit back and watch this all grow. And speaking of growing and new experiences and getting to do really cool stuff, you're just coming off the experience of a lifetime, attending your first NFL Combine in Indianapolis as media, which is very exciting. And you even got to ask your first media question to none other than new head coach of the Browns, Kevin Stefanski. What was that experience like for you at the Combine overall? And how did it feel to be hanging out at all these events and press conferences and asking questions?
Well, first of all, like I do want to thank you. You have been extremely encouraging through this entire time, and it's been cool to get to talk with you about some of the things that have been going on and some of the things that I've been experiencing. So I do genuinely appreciate how encouraging you've been through the entire process of trying to make this Dynasty Nerds thing a thing in my life. So I do genuinely appreciate it. The combine was crazy. I remember like the first day I'm driving up there, and I leave my house at 4:30 in the morning. And I'm driving to Indianapolis, and I genuinely really did not have a clue what I was doing. I got accepted by the NFL media to get press credentials, and I'm driving there, and I'm like, I'm not even fully confident I know what building I'm supposed to be at. I don't know like what I'm supposed to bring. Like, so I even like low key brought my passport in case they needed like really good identification on who I was. Cause I seriously, I had no clue what I was doing. So I pull up, pay way too much in a parking garage that was still way too far away. Walk like almost a full mile because I was just so nervous that I didn't want to like waste time trying to find another one. It's freezing cold. I get inside. I finally figure out, like, after walking in like the wrong room like twice, finally figure out like where the credentials are. Walk in there, get my press pass, and like at that point, I'm just like, okay, this has been a great day. I was like, if I don't do anything else today, like I actually, like I was able to get a press pass. Like that's crazy. But I kept going and found out where the spots where they were interviewing all of these quarterbacks and wide receivers were. And so I walk in there, and it was absurd. Like I walk in and I see Josina Anderson of ESPN standing right there. I walk a little further, Andrew Siciliano from NFL Network's there. I almost like bump into Field Yates from ESPN. And so it's just weird that like all of these media personalities that you watch for years are just all hanging out in the same space that you are. It was very surreal, and it was very overwhelming at first. I felt like a very, very small fish in a very, very big pond. But it took a little while for me to get like my bearings, figure out what I was able to do, not able to do. And so I got to, be there for, Tua Tagovailoa's interview, and I got to be there for CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy and, some of these guys that are the big name prospects in the draft, and got to be a part of that. And but I was way too nervous to ask a media question, and so I just kind of chilled in the background a little bit. And then I saw that Kevin Stefanski was going to be one of the coaches that were going to be at the podium towards the end of the first day there. And I was like, all right, if there's one person that I should be able to like build up enough gumption, it's my hometown Browns. I'm going to try to ask Kevin Stefanski a question, and I was able to do it. And clearly I needed to work on my question asking, because he gave like the most generic answer ever to a question. So I was like, I need to be a little more pointed in how I ask these questions. So throughout the next day, I was able to interview a lot more players, some of the coaches and stuff like that. And so it was a really cool opportunity for sure.
What was the question you asked Coach Stefanski?
I asked him, I said, you have two extremely talented running backs in Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. How do you plan on utilizing both of those guys in your offense next season? Which at the time I felt like was a good question. But he came back with basically, well, the more the merrier, the more good players we have. We just want to make sure we utilize good players in our offense. So you can never have too many good players. Was more or less what his answer was. So I was like, oh, okay, thanks.
Right. And I actually have Kareem Hunt, part of a big trade you and I did a couple years back on my Dynasty roster in the Brotherhood Dynasty League. So I was very interested for sure in his answer to that question. And yeah, it's just so funny. I don't know that any of us would have been able to, it's your first time doing it. I think you did a great job, and I was really impressed over you. Actually, if you do end up, or if you're already following Garret on Twitter at Dynasty Price, I think it's important to mention that you have a whole thread of your experiences at the Combine, including your very first media question on Twitter posted. So everyone should definitely go check that out and see more from Garrett's experience at the NFL Combine as media, which even as I say that still feels surreal to say, as I'm sure it's surreal for you to have lived it. I think I said this to you on Twitter. I don't often express jealousy or envy. I'm pretty happy with my life overall, I'd say, but one of the times I've been the most jealous in my existence is watching you post a video of yourself and Matthew Berry, noted and famed ESPN fantasy football senior analyst, talking about dynasty players to be on the lookout for. And that, to me, that was like, all right, if I got to go to this thing and talk to one person, he would be the one. So I think it's really cool you got to rub elbows with the men and women of the media. What,
dude, as a little behind the scenes look there, like, so you get to post this stuff and like, you try to make sure that you have your like best game face on, but like low key, I was pissing down my leg. He was talking to somebody, and I was like, you know what, maybe like you should go talk to him, just like ask him if he's willing to do like a little video about Dynasty real quick. And then like I talked myself like in and out of it like 6 different times. And finally, like when I like had built up the most like gumption to like go up to him and just like ask him if he'd be willing to do a video, because I was like, what's the worst he could do? He's just gonna say no, and we're in the same spot we're in, so might as well try. And just as I was building up enough gumption, the dude he was talking to left, and I was like, all right, like here we go. And he was super nice, like super friendly, willing to do it. So it was really cool on his behalf to take the time out for some little known dynasty fantasy football website and be able to talk with him. So that was pretty cool.
100%. Yeah, that was incredible. And it made me think of an experience I had in Las Vegas about a year and a half ago, when I actually got to go to my first Las Vegas show, and I saw Penn and Teller, the magicians, perform at the Rio. And I've, like many people, grew up watching Penn and Teller, and there's two of the faces of magic. If you know nothing about magic, you know Penn and Teller. They're very famous. And to my surprise, they did a meet and greet after the show with everyone that attended the show. So when you were talking about that experience with Matthew Berry, I had the same experience waiting in line to get a 5-second selfie with Penn and Teller, and just remember walking up and feeling the same feeling of just extreme nerves and working up the courage to be like, oh, this is my first Vegas show. I've followed you forever. I love your stuff. Thank you so much. And just take like a quick selfie and run away. So I can totally relate to that.
Absolutely.
I want to dig into some more player stuff here. What were a couple, and this could be for players or coaches, but what were a couple big takeaways you had from the press conferences you attended?
One of the most interesting ones was getting to talk a little bit with DJ Dallas. He's a running back from Miami, and he's a player that I do like, has quite a bit of upside, but he's not as well known as some of the other names that I talked to while I was there. But he was one of the most like real, genuine conversations out of anybody that was there. He was talking about how he had to see like a sports psychologist for his fumbling issues. And like right after one of his big games, he had like great production, but he had also fumbled the ball twice. And so like he was really like overthinking things. And then he also had like the anxiety of having his first kid at the same time. And so there was like all this stuff going around in his mind. And he was like trying to figure out how to like work through it as an athlete, but also as a person. Like it was just a really, really unique conversation. So that was really cool to get to see. And that was one of the things I think overall, that's just a small microcosm of the bigger thing of like getting to see a side of the NFL talent that you don't normally get to see, getting to have conversations with them, see how articulate they are, see how well they break down the X's and O's, see how they are as a person, how, willing they are to talk to media, how closed off they are, how, all of that kind of stuff, I think was probably the biggest thing that was kind of a neat experience, but also I felt like I learned a lot from some of those conversations.
Were there any surprises at the Combine, maybe in terms of player performances that you didn't expect, or maybe a couple names that are fantasy football relevant that people weren't really talking about much or weren't really on your radar that had a great Combine showing that really stick out going forward?
The two biggest ones I would say were both from the wide receiver position. A lot of people were talking about Jonathan Taylor's 4.39 40, which was very impressive. But, if you had done any research into him, like, dude was a former sprinter. So like this shouldn't have been a huge surprise. And even watching his tape, like, he did break away for a lot of long touchdown runs, and you could see for the most part, he kept the gap and often grew the gap between him and the corners or safeties that were chasing him down. So, that wasn't a huge surprise. The ones that really surprised me were Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame. I had him pegged down for more like a 4.6 type 40, and dude ran a 4.42 at 235 pounds. So just to give you a little bit of perspective, the only two players in the modern era of fantasy, or in the modern era of NFL football, to be over 6 foot, over 235 pounds, and run a sub 4.45 40-yard dash are Chase Claypool and Calvin Johnson, who we consider to be one of the most physically gifted wide receivers of all time. So that was extremely, extremely impressive. And likewise, Denzel Mims out of Baylor put on quite a show at the combine. Ran a 4.38 40 at 6'3", and maybe even more impressively, the 3-cone drill for a wide receiver. If you run it in roughly a 7, that's kind of the normal range for a wide receiver. Now things were kind of weird because they had pushed the testing times back into prime time, which a lot of players really disliked. And a lot of players didn't even participate in some of the drills just because it was so late into the evening. But he posted a 6.66, which, that's a crazy number, but, that was the time he posted in the 3-cone drill, which is just absolutely unreal, especially for a guy that size, to be able to post such a good time there. So I would say those were the two players that kind of surprised me the most as far as their testing went.
Was there a guy that was already on everyone's fantasy football radar that is projected to go high in this year's NFL draft, or projected to go high in fantasy football drafts? Is there somebody like that who maybe their stock went up even more at the combine through their performance, or somebody like that whose stock went down?
Jonathan Taylor, I think, is the one that most people would say his stock was up. Like I said, it's not up for me personally because that's kind of what I expected. But it definitely, for the broader football community, I think a lot of people have higher opinions of him now than they did before. You can make the argument that T. Higgins and J.K. Dobbins, their stock went down a little bit, simply because they didn't test. They didn't do the combine as far as the positional drills and stuff like that, and the 40 and all of that kind of stuff. They both chose to wait till their pro day to do it. So those were the only ones that I think like their stock got hurt a little bit, but even there, it wasn't much. It was only simply because they chose not to.
I want to talk just a little bit in general about this draft class in regards to the NFL draft and fantasy football. Who are, just in general, a few of your favorite wide receivers or running backs in this draft class, and why are they in your top 2 or 3?
Now, is this because I have the 101 pick in our dynasty league, and you have 102 and 103? Is this a little way to try to test the waters here?
Okay, let's just cut right to the question I want to know. Who are you drafting at 1-1? Who are you taking? Just spill the beans on the Easter pod. Let us all know.
Just spill it out. The broader question I'll stick with for now. So at the running back position, it's very, very interesting. In the past, we've had a very clear top running back. Last year it was pretty clear to, I would say, 95% of people that Josh Jacobs was in the class. Year before, I don't know anyone in the world that didn't have Saquon Barkley as their top guy. So this year is much more similar to the 2017 class, where there are a lot of very talented running backs in this class. You have J.K. Dobbins, you have DeAndre Swift, you have Jonathan Taylor, and then you even have guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Cam Akers that would probably most people have in the next tier, but aren't super far off. So it's very similar to the year that we had with Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette, Joe Mixon, Kareem Hunt. I feel like I'm missing somebody. Alvin Kamara at the time, we didn't quite know, though, was quite that good. Dalvin Cook was the one I'm missing. There were all these like uber talented running backs that people were very interested in. And there wasn't necessarily a clear cut. I know there was a lot of leagues where Fournette was the top guy taken. In our league, it was actually Christian McCaffrey was the top one taken. But I even know some people I really respect that had Dalvin Cook as their top back in the class, and had Joe Mixon not had some of the off-the-field issues and his stock plummeted a tiny bit, he could have been very much so in that conversation for the top back. So it was a very interesting season as far as that goes. And really, if you got any of those guys, you were pretty happy with how things turned out for the most part. And so I think this class is somewhat similar to that. The difference being it's a much, much deeper wide receiver class on top of it. So that's going to be the fascinating part with how all this works, because you have the likes of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, who are these really, really big name wide receivers coming into drafts this year. And then on top of it, you have the Jalen Ragers, the Henry Ruggs, who just ran a 4.27, the T. Higgins, the Brian Edwards, the now Denzel Mims and Chase Claypool are rising up boards. And there are just so many talented players in this class that it's hard to remember a class with more offensive skill position than this one.
With all of the highly talented skill players that you mentioned, and I agree, it is a very deep draft class, especially at wide receiver, and there's so many great running backs in this class. For those players, what are a couple dream player team scenarios that you would love to see play out in the draft in April?
So I think Jonathan Taylor would be a great fit for the Indianapolis Colts. He's got that track speed, but he's also, he's a little bit of a bruiser. He's 228 pounds, so he's a big boy. But I do think him more than some of the other backs needs a good offensive line, and the Colts have a very good offensive line. But when he gets what's blocked and then some, but he needs that start. He can't create as well in the backfield, I think, as some of the other players in the class. So I think he needs a really good offensive line, and I think if he gets that in Indianapolis, he's going to be an absolute stud at the next level. Right now, I would like to see somebody like Clyde Edwards-Helaire in Kansas City. Obviously, Kansas City uses their running backs in the passing game a lot. He's a very, very talented pass catcher. I think that would be a hand-in-glove fit. J.K. Dobbins, I think, will fit in most schemes. I think a zone blocking scheme would probably be the best, but I think he'll be able to adapt and fit into a lot of schemes. I think somewhere like Atlanta would probably be a good fit for him, or Tampa Bay. And whichever one doesn't happen, I think DeAndre Swift would probably be the good fit for the other one. So I think those would be two good spots there. And Miami would be an interesting one too. I know right now they don't have a lot because of them trading away a lot of their assets, but they have a ton of draft picks now, and I do anticipate that team being much, much better for years to come.
Yeah, it's funny with the Dolphins. I remember joking with one of the members of our Brotherhood Dynasty League last season after the Dolphins traded Kenyon Drake to the Cardinals, and there was that debate about, well, who's going to take over in the Miami backfield for the remainder of the season. You had the likes of Mark Walton and Myles Gaskin and Kalen Ballage. And I remember at different points picking up Gaskin or Walton in hopes of perhaps, maybe getting ahead in our Dynasty League of getting the next running back in Miami. But I quickly dropped Walton, and our friend picked him up. And I remember being like, he was trying to trade him back to me or something weird. And I was like, I don't know, man. I have these high picks in the 2020 draft. I'll probably end up drafting whoever their new running back is. So I think I agree with you on those landing spots that in terms of what would be most ideal. Speaking of the Brotherhood Dynasty League, we held our first draft, the 1-1 of Brotherhood Dynasty League drafts on August 24th of 2013. Were you still in Oklahoma City at that time?
No, that was before I left actually. So I was actually living in Bedford at the time, but I was working at a church in Akron. So for that year, I was there. I was present for that draft. But then it was the two following drafts that I was not at because I was in Oklahoma City.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it was hard for me to believe that it's already been 7 seasons that we've had the Brotherhood Dynasty League, and I don't know if I should share this piece of information. I don't know if this hurts your street cred in the fantasy football community, but actually neither you or I have won a Brotherhood Dynasty League title, therefore making it the most coveted of all Dynasty League titles. Would you agree for yourself?
Absolutely. I've had my heart broken on several occasions. I still like to say I'm a 3-day champion of our league. But yeah, that was one of the most heartbreaking losses I've ever experienced.
Yeah, you had a bit of a Kevin Dyson on the 1 yard line in the Titans Rams Super Bowl kind of heartbreak. Do you remember what that scenario was exactly? Like you had basically won, and then there was a stat correction and you lost. Is that right?
Yeah, I remember it very vividly because it was with our commissioner Corey Hunka, and we were the two in the finals. We were literally watching the last game together. The only player left. I didn't have anybody left. He had Demaryius Thomas going. And long story short, I could get all into it, but basically, he ended up like a point or a point and a half or something like that short of winning the title that night. And I'm loving it. I'm loving life. I'm waking up his kids because I'm so loud. Like it was great. But then unfortunately, 3 days later, I'm looking at my phone, just trying to like relish my victory. And I look and it says second. I was like, second? What the? That doesn't make sense. And I go back and look, and I'm like, the New England defense got 2 points that it didn't have before, and I ended up losing by like a point or a point and a half or something, or a half a point or something like that.
Yeah, that was the first real big controversy I think we had in our league. I should know our group text often blows up, and I love it. It's very entertaining. I'm a big time nerd, and much like yourself, and so I keep my own little spreadsheet of how my team performs in our league each year, and just things I want to keep note of. And I was actually proud of myself because I had never played in a dynasty league before I joined the Brotherhood Dynasty League or was invited in, and my team had an upward trajectory the first 4 or 5 seasons. Literally took the very next step each year. Like 1 year I didn't make the playoffs. The next year I made the playoffs. The year after that I won my first playoff game. And, year after that I was in the finals for the first time. Unfortunately, I got crushed though, big time. So didn't really end up working out. But, like we've talked about, I have the 1-2 and the 1-3 this year. So I'm hoping to get myself back in it. Not to toot my own horn, but to toot my own horn for a second. Picked up Lamar Jackson in free agency, got Mark Andrews, got a nice core there. I've made a lot of dumb moves that we definitely don't have to talk about. We've all we've all made a lot of dumb moves in Dynasty. I think that's kind of one of the fun parts about it, is to look back on the guy, because it's like Wall Street. You're evaluating stocks and what you think of a guy, and you're trying to predict the future. And we've all dropped guys that we desperately wish we could pick back up. We've all drafted guys we desperately wish that we hadn't. And on the flip side, we've all made moves that seemed like they were ahead of their time. So that's just the nature of Dynasty. I just wanted to ask you in general, because I know I have my thoughts on this, and to kind of personalize this more, because fantasy football is a game, but as many of our favorite analysts share, and as we often talk about, it really does so much more in terms of than just being a game, in terms of connecting people and building relationships and building bonds that last a lifetime. And I think us having this conversation today is evidence of that. So on just a personal level, what's it meant to you to be a part of the Brotherhood Dynasty League?
Oh yeah, it's been huge. I could make an argument that I don't even know that I would have ended up at the church I'm currently at with the running the sports ministry and stuff like that for a while that I was doing and stuff like that. Like, I don't even know that I would have had that connection to bring me back to Canton, Ohio, had I not been in the Brotherhood Dynasty League. Corey and I were friends, but we weren't super tight up until really getting in this league together.
Corey Hunka.
Corey Hunka, yes, to clarify. Yes, sorry about that. That literally, was part of the reason my family moved back to Ohio, was for that job opportunity. And, I might not be in the same. So, I mean, like literally this fantasy league, as silly as it sounds, has had like major ramifications on like our life, which sounds silly, but it really genuinely has. And a lot of the friendships, a lot of the relationships that I've carried from college, I still carry because of this league. Outside of this league, there's not a ton of people from the school I went to that I still talk to. There's a couple, but not many. But most of the best relationships I have from my college years are because of playing in this league together. So I think it's huge.
I would echo all of that 100%. I get funny looks from people when since moving down to the Charlotte, North Carolina area, I get funny looks from people when I'm driving back up to Ohio for 2 or 3 days, and they're like, "Oh, what are you doing up here? Are you here for work or something?" I'm like, "Nope, we have our fantasy football draft, or we're watching the Super Bowl together."
Yep.
Literally just making the trip up for that, because as you've said, those bonds are so important and have been life-changing and have gone way beyond fantasy football, which perfectly segues into something I really want to ask you about and talk to you about. So through your platform on Twitter at Dynasty Price and through Dynasty Nerds, you recently started something called Faith in Fantasy Football. What is Faith in Fantasy Football?
Ultimately, as much as I love fantasy football, as much as I enjoy this game, and that's all it really is just a game. As much as I love all of it, at the end of the day, like my relationship with Jesus far outweighs any of it. And then it goes to my relationship with my wife and my daughters, and then my friends and the broader community. And then we can talk about fantasy football. So there's clearly a hierarchy there. But I noticed that I was spending so much more time on fantasy football stuff than almost anything else. And granted, part of it is it has legitimately become a source of income for me, and so it has become part of my job. But ultimately, I felt like I'm gaining this platform that I didn't have before because of fantasy football. And if I only ever use it to talk about player values and potential trades and that kind of stuff, then I've kind of missed the boat, to be honest. And so ultimately, I started a video series that I do on Twitter called Faith in Fantasy Football. And basically what I do is I take current things that are happening in the NFL or different things that are happening in fantasy leagues, and I use those as illustrations to help explain a certain scripture I might be reading or something like that. And they're not super long; they're only about 10 minutes long or so. But it's been really cool to see some of the people that have been very encouraged by it. There have been people that absolutely hate it. They're like, keep your God as far away from my fantasy football as possible. But even some people that might not consider themselves religious in any way, but have listened just because they enjoy the stuff that I do through fantasy football and have given it a shot, and now are much more open to talking about Christ and what he's done and some of that kind of stuff. So it's been a unique platform, a unique experience, but it's been one that I've thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah, and I've very much enjoyed watching those. It's been really encouraging to just hear you share your own personal experiences and to give encouragement and to take it deeper than fantasy football, which again, is something we both love. But as we talked about with our connections in the Brotherhood Dynasty League and with what you're doing with Faith in Fantasy Football, and even articles I've seen about how there's Alcoholics Anonymous groups that use fantasy football as a way to keep each other accountable and stay sober. It's just a conduit to all these things that are so much deeper and so much more important about life. And I've really appreciated you using your platform to discuss those things. And I like you said, the response has been varied at times, but overall, I would just encourage you to keep doing it, as we've talked about. And I think it's so cool. And I think the people whose lives you've been able to have a positive impact on through that is just pretty incredible. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I constantly encourage you. That I love that you have the platform you have, because you're someone that you work hard and you've earned your voice, your platform, and are using it to really make a difference for people. Before we get off topic of the Brotherhood Dynasty League, I know you're trying, just kind of switch gears a little bit. I know you're trying really hard to get the 1-2 from me because you already have the 1-1. So maybe we can have some trade negotiations offline. You might have to give up a lot. I don't know. Maybe I think you joked that maybe we could just do a direct swap. The 1-1 for the 1-2. That makes sense. So
there you go.
Yeah, but I did, just out of curiosity, I did have a question. Who are some people in the industry that you look up to and whose content that you love?
One of the guys that I really do appreciate the work that he puts in, and I think he does a great job, is Evan Silva. And it was actually really cool. I got an opportunity to get brunch with him while we were at the combine, and he was a super nice guy, super helpful, super willing to talk about. I kept wanting to talk about the stuff he's doing and stuff he's working on. And he was far more interested in what's going on with Dynasty Nerds and that kind of stuff. And so that was really, really cool to see that and be able to talk with him. I think he's one of the goats in the industry, to be honest. Obviously Matthew Berry is one of the biggest as well. Just what he's done for fantasy in general and how he's popularized it and brought so much more information and attention to this game. I think is absolutely massive. And the cool part is honestly Rich Dotson, who was the host of Dynasty Nerds. He was somebody that I looked up to, and I really enjoyed his work. And now I get to work with him on a regular basis. So those would be the three that I would most naturally point to. But there's a lot of other extremely, extremely talented people on Twitter. The fantasy footballers are awesome as well. They do really good work, and even more so than their information, which is top notch. They're super, super enjoyable to listen to, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, I agree with all of those that you mentioned. They all put out content that I've really enjoyed. And you mentioned that brunch you had with Evan Silva of Establish the Run and so many other people in the industry. I love Establish the Run stuff. I would agree with ESPN Fantasy Focus, Dynasty Nerds, obviously. Fantasy footballers, fantasy pros. Shout out to your guy Kyle Yates, who I recently started following on Twitter. Fantasy Pros does an incredible job. And speaking of jealousy, I saw that you were at that brunch with Danny Kelly and Danny Heifetz of The Ringer, famously of the Dynasty Football Podcast, which is a podcast I listen to regularly. So, listen, man, I think the point is I'm just living vicariously through you on Fantasy Football Twitter and all your experiences. So one of the last questions I had here as we kind of wrap things up. What would you say to someone wanting to step out and pursue their dream now that you've had that experience the last year and a half? And you've had that experience before, but just, regarding you joining Dynasty Nerds, taking this leap, seeing so many of your dreams come true, what's some encouragement you would offer to someone who's sitting back and thinking that, I'd love to either get involved in fantasy football doing what Garrett's doing, or I'm just feeling hesitant to pursue my passion?
It is always a scary proposition when you're looking at this is something that I've always thought about doing. This is something I've dreamed doing. This is something that I think would be incredible. Taking those first couple steps towards it are scary because, it's that idea of what if I fail? What if I'm not as gifted in this area as I thought I was? Or what if the opportunities aren't really there like I hoped they were? But for me, honestly, I would much rather give it everything I have, give every opportunity to be able to succeed in that arena that I'm looking toward, than live with the regret of, what if I would have tried that? What if I would have, seen what happened? What if I would have blah, blah, blah. It was kind of that way for me with college sports. It's interesting. I had the opportunity to play football at Malone and enjoyed my time there. And when it was time to call it quits and hang it up, I was perfectly content calling it quits and hanging up because I knew I'd given it everything I had, and that was all the further I was going to be able to make it. Whereas, I get an opportunity to do sports leagues and stuff with guys, and you can see that these rec leagues are so significant to them and so important to them because they didn't get an opportunity to try to live that out as far as they possibly could. And so for them, they're trying to live through this moment in this rec, flag football game or, basketball game or whatever it is. And so, people often live with these regrets of, what if I would have tried it? And obviously I'm speaking through the lens of sports because that's one of the arenas I know the best. But it could be, it could be like you, Corey, you have the opportunity to do this podcasting thing that is so cool. And there's a lot of people that are too afraid to even, get the equipment because that means I might have to start a show. And that means, I don't know. What if people hate it? What if, but you're willing to step out and do something that you've always wanted to do something that you really enjoy and grow in that, which I think is super cool. It might just be, man, I've always wanted to be a chef. I think I'm good at cooking at home, but I don't know. Maybe I don't have enough to really make that happen. Man, give it a shot. Like, give yourself the opportunity to fail. Give yourself the opportunity to mess up. Give yourself the opportunity to screw up, because who knows? You might actually just make it. Like, you might actually do it. And if not, oh well. Like, you're right back in the same spot you are now. And at least you gave it a shot and you know where you stand with it. I think too often the fear of failure just paralyzes us from ever actually pursuing the things that we really want to do.
Yeah, I am so glad that you shared all of that. And, you mentioned my experience with this podcast, and it lines up perfectly with what you're saying and my mentality in starting it and pushing forward with it, because it is scary. It is uncomfortable. It is unknown. It's having to learn a new skill. It's having to really put yourself out there, which leads to the possibility of rejection or, what if you fail? What if you, all these fears that you talked about. But there's a comedian who I really enjoy named Chris Gethard, and he wrote a book called Lose Well. And one of the things he talks about that was kind of an inspiration for me to step out and start this podcast, and has been a guiding kind of thought for me with other scary things that are unknown, is exactly like you said. It's you would rather do it and try and fail and risk the possibility of it not working out. Like, you can sleep better at night knowing that you tried and maybe it didn't work out than if you just never step out, if you just never try at all. And I think that's so important to anything in life, because we're not guaranteed instant success, and it can be a grind and it can be a struggle. But, just to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I stepped out of my comfort zone. I gave this a shot. I did something that I feel like I was called to do, that I'm passionate about, that I know is fulfilling to me, and that I can have a positive impact on others. And when it does work out, or when it does positively impact people or connect with people, it's just that much more rewarding. So thank you for sharing that and your experience. And I wholeheartedly agree. That's some really great encouragement right there. And I hope people really kind of take it to heart if they're on the fence about stepping out. My last question, because as the avid podcasters and podcast listeners that we are, we know this is the time of promotion. So where can we find you and your content on social media?
Yeah, so most of my social media content really comes from Twitter. I'm at Dynasty Price on Twitter. Also, you can find some of my stuff on the Dynasty Nerds website, as well as some podcasting stuff I do in addition to Dynasty Nerds on the Dynasty Rewind podcast. And
that's at Dynasty Rewind and at Dynasty Nerds, correct?
Correct, yep.
And that is dynastynerds.com. And one of the things I did want you to mention just briefly is, what is the Nerd Herd?
Yeah, so the Nerd Herd is a subscription that we started. We put out a lot of free content. Our main podcast is free. All of our articles are free, but we wanted to kind of take things to the next level, and so we started the subscription plan. It's $3 a month, called the Nerd Herd. With it, you get all of our rankings that we do. You get an extra podcast every week that our hosts partake in, and then on top of that, you get our Dynasty Nerds film room, which is honestly one of my favorite things that we have going in the Dynasty world is this film room. So you can look up basically any rookie that's in this class and have anywhere from 2 or 3 to 6 or 7 videos of their games, but it's not the entirety of the game. It's literally just clipped to their specific plays where they are on the field. So you can get through, you want us to watch DeAndre Swift. Okay, you can watch his entire game in about 6 minutes. So it's very helpful with being efficient with your time, but yet still getting into the scouting and stuff that you want to get in.
So go join the Nerd Herd on dynastynerds.com. Go follow Garret at Dynasty Price. Follow Dynasty Nerds. Follow the Dynasty Rewind. Garret, I just want to thank you again so much for coming on. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Easter Pod. What do you say we go hammer out some of those trade negotiations?
Sounds good, buddy.
All right, talk to you later, Garret.